Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I watched her lean across the bar, laughing too loudly at a stranger's joke, brushing her hand against his arm like I wasn't even there. She wanted me to see it. That was the whole point. She thrived on reactions, anger, jealousy, even pain, because it meant she still had control. But this time, I gave her nothing. I sat there, calm, silent, letting her perform. When she finally turned back to me, her eyes were burning with anticipation. She wanted the explosion, the scene, the proof that I still cared enough to fight for her attention. Instead, I took a sip of my drink and stared past her. She snapped. Her voice cut through the music, sharp enough to draw stares from nearby tables. She shouted, "Why aren't you jealous?" I set my glass down slowly, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Why would I be jealous of my ex-wife?" The words landed harder than a slap. For a moment, the noise of the bar seemed to fade, leaving only the silence between us. She blinked, stunned, as if she hadn't realized the ground beneath her had already shifted. The truth was, I had been gone long before that night. Her games, her little tests, her constant need to push boundaries, they had chipped away at everything we once had. I had seen the signs, the smirks at her phone, the way she came home later and later, the sudden bursts of charm that never seemed meant for me. I had swallowed my pride in silence, studying her, watching her dig a hole she thought she could climb out of any time she wanted. But I wasn't her safety net anymore. I had made my decision quietly, without a fight, without warning. Every smile I gave, every calm answer, every night I didn't ask where she was, that was me leaving, piece by piece. And by the time she raised her voice at that bar, demanding proof of my jealousy, I was already free. Her face that night told me everything. She wasn't angry that I didn't react. She was terrified, because in that one sentence, I had cut the last string tying me to her game. And deep down, she knew it. The man who no longer reacts is the man she can no longer control. I stood, dropped a few bills on the table, and walked out. Behind me, I could feel her eyes following, but I didn't turn back. She had wanted a jealous husband. Instead, she got the silence of a man who had already let her go. And that silence was going to haunt her louder than any fight ever could. When I walked out of that bar, I didn't look back. My footsteps were steady, my mind clear. For years, she had expected me to chase her every time she pulled away. She thrived on the drama, the push and pull, the endless cycle of her testing and me proving myself. But that night, I ended the game without raising my voice, without making a scene. And that was what terrified her most. I drove home alone, the silence in the car sharper than any argument we'd ever had. I didn't feel anger, not even sadness. I felt something cleaner, relief. It was the kind of relief you only feel when you finally decide you're done carrying someone else's chaos. She wasn't my problem anymore. When she came home hours later, I was sitting in the living room with the lights off. She stopped in the doorway, surprised I was awake. Her eyes searched mine, waiting for an outburst, a confrontation, anything that would prove I still cared enough to fight. But all I gave her was calm indifference. I stood, walked past her, and went to bed. She called my name once, softly, almost pleading. I didn't answer. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She made coffee, scrolled through her phone, smiled too brightly, as though pretending could erase the truth. She told me she had plans that evening, said she'd be home late. I nodded once, not asking who with. That silence unnerved her more than any suspicion could have. She wanted me restless, insecure, obsessed with where she was and who she was with. Instead, I was detached, already living like she wasn't mine. That week, I started pulling back in ways she couldn't ignore. I stopped fixing the little problems around the house. I stopped filling her car with gas, stopped picking up her forgotten errands. All the invisible work I had done to make her life easier, I withdrew it piece by piece. She noticed quickly. Her tone shifted from smug to anxious. She asked why I was being so cold, why I wasn't talking. I simply told her I was fine. Fine. That single word became my weapon. Because she knew it didn't mean peace. It meant distance. It meant there was nothing left to argue over, nothing left to fix. It meant she was losing control. The irony was cruel. She had spent so much energy trying to make me jealous, trying to prove she was still desirable. But now, Faced with my silence, she was the one begging for scraps of attention. She had created the fire, but she was the only one left burning in it. The more silent I became, the louder her desperation grew. She started lingering near me in ways she hadn't for years. In the evenings, when I sat on the couch, she hovered, asking questions she never cared about before. What was I reading? Who was I texting? When would I be home tomorrow? Every question was a test, not of my answers, but of whether I'd give her any emotional fuel to feed on. I didn't. I replied briefly, calmly, and returned to my book. She hated it. She wasn't used to being invisible. For years, she had been the center of the storm, the one who controlled the rhythm of our relationship. If she wanted attention, she'd get it. If she wanted drama, she'd spark it. And if she wanted silence, she'd enforce it. But now the silence was mine, and it was suffocating her. One evening, I watched her put extra effort into her appearance. She wore the kind of dress she used to save for nights out, painted her lips red, styled her hair perfectly. She told me she was meeting friends and smiled in that deliberate way, waiting for me to ask who. I didn't. I nodded, told her to have a good time, and went back to cleaning the kitchen. The flicker in her eyes was unmistakable. She wasn't dressed for her friends. She was dressed for my jealousy. And when she didn't get it, she faltered. She came home late that night, the perfume still clinging to her skin, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom, waiting for me to acknowledge her. I didn't even look up from my phone. That silence hurt more than any fight could have, because it told her the truth. She was no longer my priority, no longer even relevant in my world. Meanwhile, I had already begun laying the groundwork for my exit. I started shifting money into a separate account. I rented a small storage unit under my name alone, moving boxes in and out during the day when she wasn't home. Documents, valuables, clothes, piece by piece, my life was relocating without her knowing. She thought she was still testing me, still in control. She had no idea I was already gone. The irony was cruel. She had flirted in front of me, demanded to see me jealous, believing it proved her power. But the more she pushed, the more she revealed her own weakness. Because jealousy isn't the opposite of love. It's still attention, still engagement. And I had given her something far worse. I had given her indifference. And indifference is a sentence no one escapes from. Her behavior shifted quickly from smug to frantic. At first, she had flaunted her flirting like a trophy, convinced it would keep me tethered to her. But when she realized I wasn't biting, the cracks began to show. She hovered closer, forced laughter into conversations, tried to draw me in with sudden bursts of affection she hadn't bothered with in months. It was clumsy, desperate, and above all, it was too late. One Saturday, she suggested we go out together. Her voice was carefully casual, but I could hear the strain underneath. I agreed, just to see how far she'd push the performance. We ended up at a crowded restaurant, one she had chosen because it was lively, full of eyes to watch her little show. She leaned in, laughed too loud, and once again, let her eyes linger on the waiter longer than they should have. She was testing me, the way she always had, but I cut her power off at the root. I didn't react. I sat calm, my expression unreadable, and simply continued eating. The more I ignored, the more her performance fell apart. She snapped suddenly, her voice sharp enough to draw attention from the nearby tables. She demanded to know why I wasn't jealous, why I didn't care that other men were looking at her. Her eyes were wide, daring me to prove myself, daring me to fall into the trap I had spent years in. Instead, I leaned back, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and told her quietly that I had nothing to be jealous of. That silence was heavier than shouting. She wanted a scene, but I gave her calm dismissal. For the rest of dinner, she barely touched her food. Her face was tight, her posture stiff. She realized then what she hadn't wanted to admit. My lack of jealousy wasn't weakness. It was freedom. Back at home, she tried again to claw her way back. She dressed carefully, poured us both drinks, and asked if I wanted to talk. I looked at her, studied her for a moment, and said nothing. I set my glass down untouched and went to bed. She sat there at the table alone, staring at the untouched drink across from her, the silence pressing down like a weight she couldn't lift. That night, I lay awake and listened as she moved restlessly through the house, opening and closing doors, pacing. She wasn't looking for something she lost. She was realizing she had nothing left to bargain with. She had wanted a jealous husband. Instead, she got the one thing she feared most, a man who had already let her go. By then, the house had turned into a stage she couldn't control anymore. Every room carried the tension of her attempts and my indifference. She set traps everywhere, her perfume lingering in the hallway, a playlist of our old songs playing softly in the background, dinner cooked from scratch and waiting on the table. Each move was calculated, each gesture begging for me to acknowledge her. But the truth was, I had already stopped seeing her as my wife. She was just another stranger trying to perform a role she no longer fit. She didn't understand that jealousy had been her greatest weapon. As long as I reacted, as long as I played the game, she had power. But without my attention, her weapon was nothing more than a blunt object she kept swinging into the void. She grew frantic. She asked if there was someone else, her voice trembling, her eyes searching my face for cracks. I looked at her, calm and steady, and told her nothing. No denial, no reassurance. Just silence. And in that silence, she unraveled. Meanwhile, I was finishing what I had started. The storage unit was nearly empty now, my new apartment nearly full. Documents, clothes, the few possessions that still mattered, they were already gone. I had left her with furniture, photos, the shell of a marriage she had killed long before I stopped caring. She didn't notice at first, but eventually, she realized the closet was thinner, the drawers lighter. She asked if I was moving things. I smiled, shook my head, and said I was fine. That word cut her deeper every time. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she asked if I still loved her. Her eyes were wet, her voice unsteady, but there was still pride there, a desperate attempt to hold onto control. I didn't answer. I rinsed my glass, set it on the counter, and walked out of the room. That was the first time I heard her sob openly, her voice cracking as she called my name. But I didn't turn back. She had once shouted across a crowded bar, demanding to know why I wasn't jealous. She had thought jealousy meant proof of love, proof that she still mattered. But now, faced with my silence, she finally understood the truth. The opposite of love isn't hate. It isn't anger. It's indifference. And indifference was the only thing I had left for her. Her desperation was no longer hidden. It spilled out in ways she couldn't control. She called me in the middle of the day, something she hadn't done in years, her voice high and strained as she asked what I was doing. I told her I was busy and hung up. That single act of dismissal left her rattled. By the time I came home that night, she had dressed herself in the lingerie I once bought her, waiting in the doorway like a woman auditioning for a role she'd already lost. I walked past her calmly, told her I was tired, and closed the bedroom door. The silence after that moment was louder than her scream could have been. The next morning, she cooked breakfast from scratch, pancakes stacked high, bacon sizzling, coffee steaming. She placed it all neatly on the table, her eyes watching for a flicker of gratitude. I sat down, ate quietly, thanked her politely, and left without another word. Her face tightened, her smile collapsing the second I walked away. She wasn't trying to win me back anymore. She was trying to survive the void I had created. Behind the scenes, my life was already shifting. I had spoken with a lawyer, set the paperwork in motion, and arranged everything so she would never be able to twist the story. Every detail was precise, my accounts secured, my assets protected, my path forward clear. She still thought she had time, that she could lure me back with tricks and staged affection. But time was already gone. That night, she finally snapped. She confronted me in the living room, her voice cracking as she asked why I was treating her like a ghost. She demanded to know if I wanted her gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I looked at her with calm detachment and said nothing. That silence crushed her more than any declaration ever could. She stormed off, slamming doors, pacing the halls, muttering to herself. But I remained still, unmoved, untouchable. She had once stood in a bar, shouting at me to prove my jealousy, believing that if I cared enough to fight, she still had me. But now she understood. I wouldn't fight because she no longer mattered. Jealousy means attachment. Anger means connection. Silence means the end. And my silence was absolute. By then, the house had become unbearable for her. Not because of shouting or fights. There were none, but because of the silence. She tried to fill it with noise, turning on the TV, playing music, speaking endlessly about meaningless things. But my calm indifference swallowed everything she threw at it. No matter how loud she became, the quiet between us was louder. One evening, she staged another performance. She invited friends over for dinner, determined to prove to the outside world that nothing was wrong. She cooked a full spread, poured wine, and sat close to me, laughing at my jokes louder than necessary, touching my arm as if she were still the devoted wife. To everyone else, it might have looked convincing. But I saw the cracks, the way her hand trembled when she reached for her glass, the way her eyes darted to me, searching for signs of warmth I refused to give. After the guests left, she dropped the mask. Her smile disappeared, and the panic returned to her face. She demanded to know what was happening, why I was pulling away, why I wasn't jealous anymore. I looked at her calmly, set my glass down, and walked upstairs without a word. She followed, shouting, begging for me to say something, anything that would prove she still mattered. But I gave her nothing. Meanwhile, my preparations were nearly complete. My new apartment wasn't just ready, it was lived in now. Clothes in the closet, food in the fridge, a bed that felt like mine. Every time I slept there, I felt lighter, cleaner, like I had finally reclaimed the life she had drained from me. The house we shared was just a shell now, a waiting room before my final departure. She noticed the difference. She commented that I smelled like a different detergent, that my clothes looked newer, sharper. She asked who I was trying to impress. I told her no one. The truth was, I wasn't dressing for anyone else. I was dressing like a man who had finally remembered his own worth. That truth cut her deeper than any affair ever could. Because betrayal, she could fight. A rival, she could compete against. But a man who no longer cares, that's a battle already lost. She had once demanded to know why I wasn't jealous. Now she finally understood. I wasn't jealous because she was no longer mine. In my heart, she was already my ex-wife. And nothing she did could change that. The night she finally broke was quieter than I expected. No screaming, no plates thrown against the wall. Just the sound of her footsteps pacing the hallway while I sat calmly in the living room, reading. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes red, her hands clenched at her sides. She asked me directly if I was planning to leave. Her voice trembled, her pride cracking under the weight of the question. I didn't look up from the page. I let the silence answer for me. After a long pause, she whispered that she was sorry, that she didn't mean the things she had said, that she only flirted to get my attention. Her words spilled out quickly, stumbling over one another, a confession years too late. I closed the book slowly, set it down, and stood. For a moment, she thought I would say something, that I would finally give her the confrontation she had been begging for. But I simply walked past her, calm and deliberate, and went upstairs. She cried that night, not quietly this time. Loud, broken sobs that echoed through the house. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening without moving. Once, her pain would have pulled me to her side. But now, it only confirmed what I already knew. We were finished. Meanwhile, the final steps of my plan fell into place. The papers were ready. My lawyer had everything prepared, the process set in motion. I wasn't leaving in chaos. I was leaving with precision. She would wake up one morning to find not just an empty bed, but an empty house, the legal documents already filed, the locks already changed. The irony didn't escape me. She had spent years craving attention, creating scenes, testing me with games. And now, when she finally begged for my focus, she had none. She was screaming into silence, clawing at a man who no longer existed in her world. The next day, she tried once more. She cooked dinner, lit candles, even set out a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. She smiled across the table, her eyes pleading. I ate quietly, thanked her, and left the table. She stayed behind, staring at her untouched glass, the candles flickering against her empty smile. She had wanted jealousy. She had wanted proof. What she got instead was indifference, carved into every movement I made. And indifference, I knew, would follow her long after I was gone. The following week, her mask collapsed completely. She stopped pretending around me. No more bright smiles, no more staged affection. Instead, her face carried the exhaustion of someone who realized the battle was lost. But still, she couldn't stop fighting shadows. Every move I made, every breath, she dissected, searching for clues. She asked where I was going, what I was doing, who I was with. Her voice was sharp, but underneath it, I heard fear. Fear of being left behind. One evening, she tried one last desperate tactic. She stormed into the room, shouting that she knew there must be someone else, that no man could just go cold without another woman waiting. I let her finish. I let her words echo in the silence between us. Then I looked at her calmly and told her she was wrong. There was no one else. I was leaving for myself. That truth shattered her more than if I had admitted to an affair. Because you can fight another person, but you can't fight the fact that you no longer matter. By then, my apartment wasn't just prepared, it was lived in. My clothes hung neatly in the closet, my documents locked away, the fridge stocked. Every night I spent there felt like reclaiming a piece of myself she had slowly taken. The contrast between that space and the house we once shared was staggering. In one, I breathed freely. In the other, I suffocated in her panic. She must have sensed the difference. One night, she followed me into the driveway, demanding to know where I was going. Her voice cracked as she begged me to talk to her, to at least tell her what she had done wrong. I opened the car door, looked at her once, and said nothing. The engine roared to life, and I drove away, leaving her standing there in the headlights, her figure shrinking in the rearview mirror. Inside the silence of my new apartment, I finally exhaled. No shouting, no demands, no tests. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I found clarity. She had asked once why I wasn't jealous, shouting in public to force my reaction. But jealousy meant I still cared. And now she knew the truth. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of freedom. She had tried to keep me chained with games, with performances, with manipulation. But the moment I stopped playing, the moment I walked away, she lost everything. And soon, she would learn what those words in the bar truly meant. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was just someone I used to know. The morning I finally left was quiet. No fights, no warnings, no drawn-out conversations. She was still asleep when I carried the last of my things to the car. The house looked stripped of life, drawers half empty, closets bare, the silence heavier than ever. I paused once at the doorway, not out of doubt, but to let the weight of it settle. This was the end of everything she thought she still controlled. When she woke, she must have realized immediately. My side of the closet was gone. The drawers she once rifled through were empty. On the kitchen counter, I left nothing but a simple envelope. Divorce papers, already signed, waiting only for her. No explanations, no apologies. Just a quiet severing of ties. By midday, my phone lit up with messages. First confusion, then panic, then rage. She demanded to know where I was, who I was with, how I could walk away without a word. I didn't respond. Silence was the only answer left. She had spent years manipulating me with games, with jealousy, with stage performances. Now she was the one trapped in silence, forced to face the emptiness she created. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, the city lights spilling through the window. My phone buzzed again, her name flashing across the screen. I turned it over, face down, and let it ring. The sound faded into nothing, replaced by the quiet hum of freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't tense, waiting for the next fight, the next test, the next demand. I was simply free. Friends would later tell me she tried to twist the story, painting herself as the victim, claiming I had abandoned her without reason. But the truth was something only she and I knew. She had stood in that bar, daring me to prove my jealousy, craving the drama of a man still chained to her. And I had answered her with finality. Why would I be jealous of my ex-wife? Those words weren't an outburst. They were a verdict. And by the time I walked away, the sentence had already been carried out. She thought she wanted power over me. What she never understood was that power only exists if someone gives it to you. I stopped giving it. I stopped reacting. I stopped playing. And in that silence, she lost everything. I didn't just leave her. I erased her from my life. And the silence I left behind will echo in her world far louder than jealousy ever could. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.